Hello and welcome to Washington Talk. I'm Jihaha. Concerns are rising in the U.S. over South Korea's political turmoil and its impact, with warnings of growing Chinese and North Korean influence. The debate on ending the Korean War is back, as Congressman Brett Sherman reintroduced the Peace on the Korean Peninsula Act, reigniting discussions on its implications. Today we examine China and North Korea's influence campaigns and the renewed debate over ending the Korean War.
This is an issue for which freedom-loving, democracy-loving Americans should not be neutral.
Is that Gordon? Yes, is that Gordon? Am I doing good on China? Tell you one thing, nobody's ever done like I've done on China. Nobody ever let people know what was happening with respect to China.
It is a mutual step toward peace. Now, hopefully, in 2025, to the formal state of war.
In the studio with me, Colonel David Maxwell, the Vice President at the Center for Asia-Pacific Strategy. Colonel Maxwell was a former military planner for the ROK U.S. Combined Forces Command. Also joining us, Mr. Bruce Klingner, Senior Research Fellow at the Heritage Foundation. Mr. Klingner spent 20 years at the Central Intelligence Agency and the Defense Intelligence Agency and served as CIA's Deputy Division Chief for Korea. Welcome to the show.
Thank you
for
for having
both
us
today.
Great to be here.
Okay. Colonel Maxwell, at CPAC, prominent conservative figures voiced unusually specific concerns about South Korea's recent political crisis. Former U.S. Ambassador at Large for Global Criminal Justice, Morse Tan, strongly criticized what he described as attempts to create an environment that provides a haven for North Korean spies and welcomes the influence of the Chinese Communist Party. Do you think this assessment accurately reflects the reality on the ground in South Korea? Having observed South Korea's political landscapes for years, do you believe South Korea is becoming increasingly vulnerable to Chinese and North Korean influence? Also, do you see growing concerns about this issue in Washington?
So this is a very complicated situation because most people demand evidence of these allegations. But what we have to understand is that the United Front Work Department of the PRC, of the CCP, and the United Work Department and the Cultural Engagement Bureau of North Korea have very sophisticated agents operating in South Korea. And they have they're highly skilled at tradecraft, which of course hides their malign activities and their subversive activities. And so really what we have to do is read their doctrine and understand their intent. China is practicing unrestricted warfare, and it's three warfares of psychological warfare, lawfare, legal warfare, and media or public opinion warfare. And we read their documents, we know what their intent is, we can see the actions. And of course, they are trying to create dilemmas for South Korea and for the United States. They're trying to subvert the South Korean political system to weaken it. And this is happening, and has happened for many years. Now, we can see one of the strongest elements of the evidence of this is in the South Korean National Assembly, where they've tried to pass a law updating Article 98 of the criminal law, which will expand counter-espionage against all foreign elements rather than just now only one country, North Korea. And so, but the PPP has pushed this, but the opposition, DPK, has prevented it. And that really speaks for itself. into how much of a threat really exists and who's on which side.
So, Colonel Maxwell, interestingly, President Donald Trump personally mentioned and praised Gordon Chang during his CPAC speech. Given that CPAC's main session saw unprecedented public concerns about South Korea's political turmoil, and Trump openly endorsing Chang's warnings on China, how should we interpret this? Do you see a connection between this narrative at CPAC and how the U.S. government currently perceives South Korea's political situation?
I think what Gordon Chang helps us to do is to frame the assumptions that we really need to understand. And it's fundamental that we need to understand the nature, the objectives, and the strategy of the PRC, and particularly the CCP, and the Kim family regime. And so he's giving us a perspective that contributes to developing those strategic assumptions. Now, I think that what we are seeing is active espionage activities by China and the North to influence things, as we've said, to really undermine the legitimacy of South Korea. But on a bigger scale, we really need to step back. And this is a fight for the soul of democracy in Seoul. And of course, among the political parties in South Korea, with North Korean influence, but really, this is also about strategic competition between the PRC and the U.S. And the PRC would like to create strategic dilemmas for the United States, drive a wedge in the ROC-U.S. alliance, and weaken all of the U.S. allies, because the U.S. silk web of alliances, of friends, partners, and alliances throughout the Indo-Pacific and the world is really a threat to Xi Jinping. Now, I'm not sure how much of our government is recognizing this, although it is important that the president appears to be aware of this. So what must be done are really four things. First is to recognize the strategy, what China and North Korea are doing. The second is to understand it, have a deep understanding of how they operate and what they're trying to achieve. And the third is to expose the strategy. And this is really key, and we're grateful to Voice of America because you're able to expose what is happening. And then the fourth is to attack the strategy with a superior political warfare strategy that will really counter China's attempts to export its authoritarianism really around the world to strategic areas, and especially on the Korean Peninsula.
Mr. Klingner, the U.S. has consistently reaffirmed its commitment to protecting South Korea from North Korea's threat. In your view, should the U.S. also play a role in safeguarding South Korea from China's malign influence operations? If so, what specific actions should Washington take?
Well, certainly we should be trying to protect and assist South Korea in defending against Chinese, North Korean, and other influence operations, as we should be working with our allies and partners around the region or throughout the world. And we know that China is engaged in these influence operations, disinformation, as part of a broader strategy, which includes overt means of coercive public diplomacy, influence by economic, their trade imbalances with other countries, and also the weaponization of trade. If you don't do this, we will punish you. So it's a really multifaceted Chinese threat, both overt and covert. So we should work with Seoul and others to identify and publicize and constrain these influence operations. There's very strong anti-China sentiment within South Korea. So any of exposure of these operations really works against Beijing once they're exposed. So we need to work not only with the government, but with the private sector as well, the internet providers and other companies, even academics and universities, because China uses Confucius institutes to influence the academic programs at universities through the funding or withholding of funding. So it's not just with the government, but also our private sector should be working with the South Korean and other private sectors to identify any influence operations, disinformation on the internet, expose it, reduce it, eliminate it. So it really is a very large effort that needs to be done with and both within and without the government.
Colonel Maxwell, Chinese ambassador to South Korea, Daibing recently claimed that certain forces are using China as a card to achieve their own political objectives. He also warned that if South Korea follows the U.S. pressure to join in countering China, choosing the U.S. unilaterally while abandoning China's vast market would not be a wise decision. How do you assess this assertion? Also, how does the U.S. government interpret Beijing's increasing pressure on politically unstable South Korea? And what course of action might Washington take in response?
Yes, well, I think that China has really showed its true colors going back to 2017, and the fact that it is not a responsible member of the rules-based international order. When we deployed the THAAD, the controversial deployment of THAAD, China conducted aggressive economic warfare against South Korea. Now, South Korea proved to be very resilient, and they were able to counter this with a lot of pain, but they were able to do that. And since then, South Korea has been decoupling from the Chinese economy to really increase its resilient capabilities and to be stronger. And so I think we have to recognize this. And of course, this is not really a case about choosing between China and the U.S. The U.S. and South Korea are blood allies. There should be no doubt about the strength of our alliance. And we have a security commitment, the Mutual Defense Treaty. But in fact, it's really up to South Korea to make a decision on what is in its best interest. South Korea needs a Korea first policy. And I'm confident that Korean leaders, when they look objectively at China's intent, China's vision, and they look at U.S. intent, U.S. vision, that they will see that Korean and U.S. Values and interests align. And they don't align with China. And so Korean leaders have no I don't think have any trouble seeing how important their relationship with the U.S. is, and we're seeing the actions that they've taken over really the last 7-8 years to decouple from China to protect themselves from Chinese malign activities. And of course, the United States, we must be engaged with our allies. We provide security guarantees, but we must also be cognizant of Chinese economic warfare and help our ally to be able to counter that, and as we've already discussed, to counter the disinformation efforts that China is conducting.
Mr. Klingner, how do you think North Korea is seeking to exploit South Korea's domestic political instability and concerns about China's influence operations? What impact do you foresee this having on Pyongyang's broader strategy towards South Korea and the international community?
North Korea is certainly enjoying the turmoil that is, underway in South Korea, and you would think they'd be doing as much as they can to exploit it. On the other hand, Napoleon Bonaparte once said, "Don't interrupt your enemy when he's making a mistake." So Pyongyang might see this as, without any action at all, they may be achieving more than they ever possibly thought they could through any of their covert means. So. One would think they'd be trying to exploit it, they're influencing the opinions of the South Korean voters, et cetera. But they may just see a danger in any operation that they are engaged in becoming public and working against them.
Okay. I'm a little bit bullish, though, on this and on South Korean democracy. When I compare 1980, 1987 to 2025, there's been very little political violence in South Korea. I mean, the people have been very restrained. They are speaking out, but they are protesting. And so I would invoke Nietzsche, I hope. That which does not kill me makes me stronger. And I think that's which does not kill South Korean democracy, hopefully will make it stronger in the future.
Okay, Colonel Maxwell, amid South Korea's ongoing political crisis, Representative Brad Sherman has once again introduced the Peace on the Korean Peninsula Act, which calls for a formal declaration to end the Korean War, the establishment of a U.S.-North Korea liaison office, and the State Department's development of a peace agreement roadmap. This is the third time, and the previous attempts failed. So do you believe this bill, as its title suggests, would contribute to lasting peace on the Korean Peninsula?
Well, first of all, I want to state emphatically that I favor peace on the Korean Peninsula, and I think all Koreans and all Americans do as well. However, we have to ask, will an end-of-war declaration provide for the security of South Korea? Paper and rhetoric do not trump steel, and there's a lot of steel on the north side of the DMZ that is an existential threat to South Korea. And so we have to really examine what an end of war declaration will do. And I think that it fundamentally can undermine security. Now, in terms of North Korea desiring engagement, we have to remember North Korea fears its own people more than it fears the combined ROC and U.S. militaries. And so it is unlikely that they're ever going to allow foreign engagement on the scale that is proposed, because the engagement with foreigners will reveal the truth about the regime and its oppressive rule of the Korean people in the North. And so if survival is the key, Kim Jong-un will have to keep out the outside world and continue to do so. And so I don't think that that is a viable course of action for the future, as much as I would like to see that happen so that we could focus on engaging with the Korean people to help them achieve freedom.
Okay. Mr. Klingner, given that the Republican Party currently holds the majority in the House, wouldn't it be difficult for this bill to pass? I mean, if it were to be enacted, what kind of outcomes could we expect?
Well, I think it did not pass in previous iterations because people saw that it would not really achieve what we hope to achieve on the Korean Peninsula. A peace declaration is a political gesture, quite different from a formal peace treaty, which in my view would require conventional arm reduction talks, confidence and security building measures, as we did with the Conventional Armed Forces in Europe Treaty, where you thin out forces and move them away from the contact zone. A peace declaration, as was advocated by the Moon Jae-in administration, when their officials would come to Washington and say, look, it's meaningless, it has no impact on the situation in the peninsula, why not sign it? I was like, for that very reason. It doesn't reduce the North Korean threat to South Korea. It creates a false sense of peace, which would lead many to advocate for a reduction or removal of U.S. forces on the peninsula. So you've degraded Allied deterrence and defense capabilities for a gesture which does nothing to address the North Korean threat.
Okay. We know former South Korean President Moon Jae-in pushed for an end-of-war declaration throughout his term, but failed to garner support from the Biden administration. However, given President Trump's willingness to engage unconventional diplomacy with Kim Jong-un, do you think he would be open to reviving discussions on a formal end to the Korean War?
He may, and that is a concern I have, is that if North Korea depicted this as a grand diplomatic success, that those who haven't worked on the Korean issues for decades might see it as, yes, this is seemingly a great gesture, a political breakthrough. It will lead to the peace process. I think you need the peace process before you sign the document, by reducing the threat, by reducing the potential for even inadvertent conflict on the peninsula. So you need to overlook what appears to be a political success or a diplomatic success, and look under the hood as to how do you actually achieve a tangible reduction of the threat and a tangible way that you reduce the risk of conflict on the peninsula.
Colonel Maxwell, ironically, North Korea itself has expressed skepticism towards the idea of a formal peace declaration. Just 2 days after President Moon proposed an end-of-war declaration at the 2021 UN General Assembly, Pyongyang dismissed the idea as premature and claimed that the withdrawal of U.S. hostile policy must come first.
We're seeing Kim Jong-un's political warfare at work here. And the real essence of this is that he wants the U.S. to end the hostile policy. And to him, that means not peace negotiations as the way that Bruce lays out correctly, and all of the confidence-building measures that he outlines, which are necessary. What he wants is an end to the ROC-U.S. alliance, an end to extended deterrence, an end to the ROC-U.S. alliance, and most importantly, pushing U.S. troops off the Korean Peninsula. That is what he really wants, and then he will sign a peace agreement. And what he's trying to do is create the conditions so that he can dominate the peninsula. Despite his rhetoric calling South Korea the main enemy and ending the policy of peaceful unification, he hasn't ended the policy of domination of the Korean peninsula under the rule of the guerrilla dynasty and Gulag state. And so we are seeing him execute his political warfare strategy and using what our congressmen propose, what former presidents have proposed to support his political warfare strategy.
Mr. Klingner, shortly after taking office, President Trump referred to North Korea as a nuclear power, hinting at a possible shift in U.S. policy. However, the White House later reaffirmed complete denuclearization as its official objectives. But some analysts in Washington and Seoul speculate that second Trump government could pivot towards arms control rather than full denuclearization. What's your view on this?
Well, we've seen now at the presidential level in the Trump-Ishida joint statement that the U.S. has again affirmed denuclearization is our policy. Some would argue that denuclearization is unachievable and therefore we need to switch to arms control. But if we abandon denuclearization as a formal objective, that's against the 11 UN resolutions, the Non-Proliferation Treaty, even U.S. law, and it would remove the legal justification or basis for some of the pressure and the sanctions on North Korea. So I think we need to maintain denuclearization in any kind of agreement as the end goal. But any denuclearization agreement would be implemented incrementally. We may never get to the goal line, but each step would be a way of reducing the threat to America and our allies. But we can't abandon denuclearization.
Colonel Maxwell, former South Korean intelligence chief Park Ji-won has suggested that recognizing North Korea as a nuclear armed state could be a first step toward denuclearization. His proposal outlines a phased approach of readmitting North Korea into the NPT, permitting IAEA inspections, freezing its nuclear program, preventing proliferation, and gradually normalizing U.S.-North Korea relations. Do you think Washington would ever consider such a proposal as a viable solution?
Well, I agree with everything that Bruce said, and that's a concern. But arms control negotiations is really a victory for Kim Jong-un's political warfare strategy. It's what he wants. He wants that recognition, and it means he keeps his nuclear weapons, and he continues to execute his strategy. What we really need to see is a radical new strategy, and based on the strategic assumption that North Korea will never negotiate away its nuclear weapons as long as the Kim family regime remains in power. And that's why the U.S. should shift to a new policy. And remember that during the first Trump administration, President Trump gave it a shot. He offered Kim Jong-un really a way out. And it is Kim Jong-un that rejected President's offers. And so now we really need to shift to a human rights up front approach, an information campaign, and the pursuit of a free and unified Korea. And the U.S. should support the Korean people's pursuit of a free and unified Korea. If anybody's going to win the Nobel Peace Prize, they're going to win it for saving the 25 million Korean people in the North. And the path to a Nobel Peace Prize is really in these 12 words. Unification first, then denuclearization, and the path to unification is through human rights. And if anyone follows that path, they could win a Nobel Peace Prize. In terms of denuclearization, one thing that the ROC and U.S. government have just recently agreed on is denuclearization of North Korea versus denuclearization of the peninsula. And that's very important because Kim Jong-un looks at denuclearization of the peninsula as removing U.S. troops from the South because they have access to nuclear weapons. And so this shift really corrects a mistake that was made during the Moon administration when they stated denuclearization of the entire Korean peninsula. And it's important that the focus is on denuclearization of the North.
All right, that's all the time we have for today. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching. Please join us again next week for more analysis and discussion.